Alrighty, so this is the sort of second version of this lesson. I posted a version of this lesson before, but it has led to a lot of common mistakes. So you need to really pay attention to this lesson, because if you use what we're about to go through in the incorrect way, you are going to end up taking so many invalid and low probability trades. So this is extremely crucial that you get this correct and you know exactly how to use this method when it is valid. Okay, so this is super important that you get this lesson correct, but let's go through it. So as you have seen so far, with this entry model, the LC2A, we are very simply looking for a fake break liquidation to occur where we have a low that breaks the high. We look for that to get liquidated, and if it is with our POI mitigation, we take the entry. Okay, so we are not looking at any liquidity points as we saw in the previous lesson, right? We're not looking at anything in the leg to the left in this swing leg here, right? The leg inducement. If there's any lower time frame lows within here or anything when you look down, or medium time frame, we don't care about anything in here, right? That should be very clear from the previous lesson. We only care about what forms in the pullback for when we are looking for potential strong liquidations to trade this POI, okay? We should all be very clear on that. So when you are looking at your lower time frame, typically what you will see is there would have been a bearish CHoCH up here, right? And then we have all of this price action here. And once we finally get our POI mitigation, right, at this point here, as soon as price hits your POI, what do we look for? We look to see if a strong liquidation has already occurred. In this case, we can see that, right? Because back here, we had bearish fractal structure on the lower time frame. Price then broke the high, so we got a bullish change of character. Okay, we then mark the extreme low that caused that CHoCH. We always take the lowest point that led to that. Okay, nothing here. We always want to take the lowest point. That then gets liquidated. And now that we have that combined with our POI mitigation, now we can take the trade. Okay, so it doesn't matter that the liquidation occurs before the POI, right? It can occur within the POI. It can occur before it. It doesn't matter. Just as long as we only take the trade once the POI has been mitigated. Yep. If we get the POI mitigation at this point and there hasn't been a strong liquidation yet, then what do? We simply wait for one to occur within the POI, okay? And then we can take the entry if it's still within the POI. They are the basics. They are what you should be very comfortable with at this point. So this is how a typical textbook entry looks like. It's very easy to see the textbook entries. The immediate, it occurs in the immediate price action right in front or within the POI. We get a nice clean fake break, liquidation, mitigation, and then we basically trade that move, okay? These are the simple trades. That is how the majority, 90% of your trades should look like this, okay? But what we're going to go through today in this lesson is when there's a slight difference, but it's a rare circumstance, okay? Let's go through it. So there's a lot going on here when you first look at it, and we're going to go through it really slowly because it is super key that you get this, okay? So what this method is when we can use CHoCHs for our fake break. So an CHoCH is when you are looking at the internal fractal structure. So internal fractal structure is the fractal structure that occurs between the true fractal high and low, okay? So it's extremely important that you are only using this method when, well, let me show you exactly when, but basically it is when the true fractal low is behind or within the POI. Okay, so let me go through it really slowly and it will become very clear. Some of you may think you have this, but I'm seeing a ridiculous amount of people getting this wrong in the Discord so far, okay? So please listen to this very carefully. So sometimes, and this won't happen a lot, let me just draw on these lines, I've forgotten it. Sometimes you will get kind of quite like a small medium time frame range where you almost get like an impulsive leg like this, right, on your medium time frame. And then this will obviously give us the POI that we then potentially want to trade from. But when we drop down to our lower time frame, so this is the thin gray price action, what you may notice is when you go to map your lower time frame fractal structure, because this was one impulsive leg on your lower time frame as well, you may find that when you go to find the fractal high and the fractal low, that actually it's all the way down here still. Because when you look at these candles on your lower time frame, they might all have broken the previous candle's high. And what does that mean? Well, it means that if you're trying to find where the fractal low is on the lower time frame, it's actually all the way down here still, right? Because that was the last fractal low, and then this is all just one fractal leg. There's no fractal low within here, okay? So if this is where that true active fractal low is on your lower time frame, well, for us to use the LC2A entry model, where we need a fake break to occur, right, for a fractal high to be broken, well, how can we do that? Because the fractal high is up here and the fractal low is down here. So that means any price action that then forms within here, that would mean that we can't trade it. We'd have to ignore it. But obviously, you know, that's not ideal, because if we get something like this, where we get a low that leads to a break of a high, and then we get a liquidation of that low, I personally want to use that. That's good enough for me. I want to get involved. But technically, it wouldn't be valid because the true fractal low is all the way down here and the fractal high is up here. So you would need to wait for the high or low to be broken for there to be a CHoCH. Okay? So again, this is super, super key. You only now look at the internal fractal structure only in this scenario where the true low is behind or within the POI. Okay? Because what I'm seeing people are now doing is they're using the internal structure when that isn't the case. Okay, so we only do it when we get like a really impulsive leg down here and the true low and high are basically on this leg, and this is your internal fractal structure. So the way you do this, okay, when this happens and you see that the true low is behind or within the POI, so by within the POI, what I mean is sometimes like the fractal low might be like here, right? So then when price comes back and you get your POI mitigation, okay, well, it hasn't actually taken the true fractal low yet. So this is when, you know, we're at this point, you're allowed to look at the internal fractal structure, okay? So once you've identified that the true fractal low is, you know, behind the POI or like within it, like say somewhere down here, but price action is here, you're then allowed to consider the internal fractal structure, okay? But this is the next super, super key point that a lot of people are getting wrong. The way you map your internal fractal structure is you start mapping it from the very start of the pullback up here, okay? So you need to make sure that if the true fractal low is like all the way down here and you're going to use the internal structure, start mapping it literally from the start of the pullback up here, okay? So you'll see that this is the true internal fractal low, right? Then that's the internal fractal high, and you look at these points here, okay? So where I put the orange circles on, those are the internal fractal highs and lows, okay? Because you start mapping it from here. So that's the first low, right? So then you know you can start mapping it from here, right? That's then that fractal bearish continuation, which means this is our new fractal high. Okay, so at that moment, that's our internal fractal high. Price is coming down, then we pull back. So at this point, this is our internal fractal low. Price then breaks it. Okay, so if we get rid of all these lines, that's our next internal fractal break to the downside. Okay, so at this point, that's our internal fractal high, right? And this is our internal fractal low. Okay, when price is here. Price is then pulling back. All of this price action within here, okay, where is it? It is between the internal fractal high and it's between the internal fractal low, okay? Because this, remember, is the true fractal low. So that up until now, this is always what you've paid attention to. This is the true internal fractal low. This is the true internal fractal high. Why? Because there were no fractal pullbacks within here. So all of this price action that we're looking at with the orange dots, this is the internal fractal structure, right? You start mapping it from the start of the pullback. Internal fractal low, we get a break, that becomes our internal fractal high, we get a pullback, we get a break. So right now when price is here, this is our bearish internal fractal range, right? That's the internal fractal high, this is the internal fractal low. So all of this price action here, what is this? This is in between the internal fractal high and the internal fractal low. So what would we call this? We would call this the internal of the internal fractal structure, right? It gets a bit confusing. We always ignore this price action, okay? So we only ever go to one layer of internal fractal structure. We never go to that second layer. We are never mapping or caring about the internal of the internal fractal structure, okay? This is the fractal high. This is the fractal low. At this point, this is the internal fractal high and the internal fractal low. We ignore the price action between that. We ignore the internal of the internal, okay? That is not relevant for what we're looking at or what we need. That is super, super key, okay? So start mapping it from here, we pull back, right? This is bearish internal fractal structure. That internal high at this point then gets broken, okay? So we get a move that leads to a break of that high. So at that moment, we now have a potential fake break of the internal fractal structure. We get an CHoCH, an internal change of character, right? Because the internal high is broken. We ignore the internal of the internal. We're only looking at that first layer of internal structure, okay? Now, this is the third bit that a lot of people are getting wrong. Once we get that internal structure and we get that fake break, right? This potential fake break, where do we put our strong liquidation point? It is not here, okay? Because this is the internal fractal low at this point, right? Because that's the nearest low that took out the high, okay? But that is not what we care about for the actual strong liquidation point. For the strong liquidation point, we always take the extreme point that led to the CHoCH, to the break, okay? Because we want to take the lowest point. We want to take the best area where there's going to be the strongest liquidity, and that's always going to be the lowest point, okay? So again, when we have an impulsive leg like this, and we look on our lower time frame, and the lower time frame true fractal low is all the way down here, or somewhere within the POI, right? That is then when we are allowed to consider the first layer of internal structure. But where do we map it? We start mapping it from the very, very start of the pullback. We then start mapping where those internal fractal highs and lows are. So we start mapping it here, where I'm drawing it in red. We start mapping it here, right? Lower low, internal lower high, internal lower low. So at that point, these two red lines are the internal fractal range, right? So all of the price action between those two red lines, between the internal fractal high here and the internal fractal low, we ignore all of these highs and lows, okay? At this point here, the internal fractal high is broken. So now what we can do is we can label that bullish internal change of character, okay? So we have our internal change of character, which means we now have our first internal potential fake break, right? So to find the strong liquidation point, we don't take the new internal fractal low, because this would be it. Instead, we map the extreme internal low that led to that break. We always take the lowest point because that is where the strongest amount of liquidity will be. We don't care about any of these lows for the strong liquidation point. So the very, very moment you get that internal change of character to the upside on the first layer of internal structure, draw this line with the X or whatever you use and set your alert there, okay? The moment that this happens here, we get the fake break, look for the lowest point, draw your line there, set your alert, and you now ignore everything that happens until this extreme low is broken, okay? So once this happens and you set your alert there, price can do this, it can do this, it can come down, it can sweep these lows, it can go back up, it can break more highs, it can do all of this. We don't care. We are waiting for this very, very extreme low to be broken. Only once it's broken, then we can look to potentially get involved, okay? So that's super, super key. Only map the first layer of internal structure. You do that by looking at the very first highs and lows that form within the pullback. You then wait for that internal high to be broken. The moment that breaks, you find the extreme low, which is here, okay? You ignore the true internal fractal low at that point. You're looking for the extreme liquidation point. You ignore everything that happened. If price comes down like this, I'm going to draw it, hang on, okay? And breaks this low, that is actually a bearish internal change of character because that's the first layer of internal structure still, because this is the low that broke that high. It's the nearest internal low. But because we've already had that first fake break here, okay, we're now not caring about that and we're waiting for the extreme liquidation point to occur. So if this happens, that's not a valid trade. We ignore everything that happens here. I don't care what happens here. The extreme point must go. Okay, I'm going to keep repeating this because I'm seeing so many mistakes with it, okay? So this is valid. If it gets liquidated, the POI is still respected, we can take the entry, okay? So read these annotations. It can kind of help you to do it, right? Map the extreme low that broke the internal fractal high. We've done that, okay? This low here. We always take the extreme high and low that caused that break, okay? So yes, this low here did break this high, but why do we not care about that? Because that's the internal of the internal fractal structure. We don't care about it. We only map the first layer and we define that from the start of the pullback, okay? Once that fake break occurs, we take the extreme and you wait for that to go. Now, the only reason, again, people keep forgetting this, and it's okay, but you need to get this drilled into your mind. The only reason why we are allowed to look at the internal fractal structure is because of point 1. So do not forget this point. This is why it's step 1. We only look at the internal fractal structure when the true fractal low is too far away, right? So it's all the way behind the POI. So it doesn't allow us to get involved in this position if this happens unless we can look at the internal structure, the first layer. So that's why step 1 is super, super key. We never ever even think about mapping the internal structure unless step 1 has happened. And it doesn't happen that often. It's quite rare that it happens. So this is almost like an exception. This is a rare circumstance. Your brain should just literally just be thinking about mapping the true fractal structure 98% of times. This is in the rare occasion where you kind of get like a small and medium time frame range. Maybe it's quite impulsive. You drop down to your lower time frame and the true fractal low is like here or here. So then when we get the mitigation, you know, well, I need to work with this price action. And this is then when you can use this method. But this is it's a rare thing. So if you don't understand this and you find it confusing, it's absolutely fine. Ignore this. Maybe come back to it at a later date. And just always ignore the internal price action for you, because it's not going to be the difference between you being profitable or not. This is quite rare. Okay, I don't know the exact numbers of how often it happens, but it is very, very rare. Okay, so make sure you have these rules in your mind. It's super, super important that you get each of these steps correct. Okay, map it from the start of the pullback, only use the first layer, and only use this entire method if the fractal low is like all the way down here or down here, right? So yeah, okay. So what are the ways in which it can be invalid and what I'm seeing? Well, again, step 1, it's the same scenario. Let me just put this on. Okay, exact same scenario where the true fractal low is all the way down here, or say somewhere within the POI. Okay, so this is when you're then allowed to go to step 2, which is pay attention to the internal structure. Where do you start mapping it? You start mapping it from the very start of the pullback. Don't just suddenly look at the price action here and go, well, this looks like the internal fractal. No, because you could be wrong. You need to go all the way back up to here. Okay, so start mapping it from here. Then you'll have the true range, okay? So when we get this fractal break here, right, where is our internal fractal range? This would be the internal fractal high, and this is your internal fractal low. So if price does this, and we come up and we come up, and then we come down at this point, so when price action is here, let me zoom right in, okay? What I'm seeing is people are looking at this, okay, imagine we've already got the mitigation, right? So to make it a bit more valid. Price action is here, and they're going, well, this low broke this high, so therefore it must be a strong low because it broke a high to the left. We've got the liquidation, we're within the POI, now I'm going to take the trade. Invalid. Why is it invalid? Because this low here broke the internal of the internal. It's not valid. Right, sorry. Like, this is the range we're within. That's why it's super important you know where the first layer of internal structure is. This is the first layer. This is the internal low. This is the internal high. We ignore everything in between. So if price comes down and liquidates this low, yes, this low here broke this high, but that's the internal of the internal. It is irrelevant. It is invalid. It is not strong enough. We do not care about it. Okay? Now, if price comes down and liquidates this low, this is the true internal fractal low, right? This is that first layer of internal structure. This is the internal fractal low. So if we get a liquidation of this into our POI, why is that not valid? Because it is the true internal fractal low. It's the first layer of internal structure. Well, is this a strong low? Did it break any structure to the left? No, it didn't do that, right? This is the true internal fractal low. It needs to break the internal fractal high. It didn't do that. For this low to be valid, it would need to break this high. Then we take the extreme low, then we get it liquidated, but it didn't do that, okay? So first layer of internal structure, you map that from the start of the pullback. This is the true low, but this low must break the true internal fractal high to the left, which it didn't do. So we ignore all of this. This is all internal of the internal. We don't care about it. It's not significant. So when price comes and liquidates this, this is the true internal low, but it didn't break the high to the left. Therefore, it's invalid. Okay, so neither of those liquidations are valid. Okay? If you find this confusing, it's fine. Just don't even think about internal fractal structure. Literally leave it. It will not make a massive difference to your results. But if you start using this wrong, it will have a huge, probably negative impact on your results. Okay? Because you're going to be there'll be trades everywhere. There's almost no situation in which an internal fractal structure isn't going to happen. Like these liquidations are going to be everywhere, and you're going to be trading all sorts of madness, and there's going to be like a million valid trades a day. Okay, so again, this scenario is quite rare. Make sure you're mapping it from the start of the pullback, and make sure when you get the true fake break of that first layer of internal structure, you always take the extreme point. So if we're getting long, we always take the lowest point that led to that break. And if we're getting short, you'd always take the highest point, okay? Watch this again and again and again, and we'll look at one example. So this is an example from, I think, pretty much the first lesson in this module. Let's not worry about the overall trade idea, but essentially we want to trade from this M15 POI. Okay, so this is our medium time frame on the M15. This is the zone we want to look to get long from. Let's jump down to our lower time frame, which is going to be the M5 in this case. Okay, now when you jump down to the M5, where is the true fractal low? Well, if we look here, that was the last fractal pullback, and then all of these candles break the previous candle's high. Okay, so that means the true fractal low is all the way down here. Okay, so remember, with this setup, we're only looking for strong liquidity points that form in the pullback, right? We're not looking at any liquidity points here. It must be in the pullback, right? Pullback inducement, okay? So if we know that, and what then happens if price comes down like this, gives a fake break, right? Like this, and then we go to the low here, and then we come down, right? Can we take that trade? Well, the true fractal low is down here, and the true fractal high is all the way up here. So if you don't use internal fractal structure, this would not be valid for you because you would need to wait for either this, this low to go or the high to go for a new fractal structure. This is all the internal, okay? So that is why we use internal fractal structure only in these scenarios, because otherwise you're gonna have to sit on your hands. So that's why I'm happy to use internal fractal structure only when the true low is within or behind the POI, okay? So that's step one. This is why then I'm even beginning to think about using the internal structure, right? Because the low is down here, so I'm going to map the first layer of internal structure in the pullback, okay? So let's see what happens, right? So we're starting to pull back, okay? Don't really have anything to work with to map, okay? Now we can see our first internal fractal low, right? So, let's draw that on, okay? And you can view that as your first internal low, okay? Because the true internal low is obviously down here. This is the pullback. We've had a movement up, so this is our first layer of internal fractal structure, okay, internal fractal structure. Price then has a fractal continuation, fine, okay? So then this would be our internal fractal low, and this will be our internal fractal high, okay? So basically we just have bearish internal fractal structure. That's fine, okay? So what would we need to see for a fake break? Well, we need to see the internal fractal high get broken. Okay, so if price comes up and breaks that internal fractal high, the first layer, this then will be the extreme point that led to that bullish internal CHoCH, that bullish CHoCH, which then means this would be then the extreme low, the lowest point that we can then look to see get liquidated into our POI, and then we could take the entry if that happens, right? So this is where you can map your CHoCH if you want to use it. Okay, price pulls back. So now we get our bullish CHoCH. Okay, because remember, the true fractal low is down here, but we're allowed to map that first layer of internal fractal structure. So we now get that CHoCH. I'm just going to make it a solid line just so we can see it a bit more. There we go. So now that happens, okay, this is key. Take the extreme. Now it's obvious in this scenario because it's just kind of one leg, but sometimes it can be a bit more complex, and you can see like price comes up and it forms a low like this, and then we get the bullish internal CHoCH, the CHoCH, and then yes, this is then the actual internal fractal low at that point. That would be the correct internal fractal low, but we don't care about that because what we're looking to do, once we get that CHoCH, we don't care where the new internal fractal low is. What we care about is where the strong liquidity point is. And that's always the lowest point that led to that movement. So it's obvious in this scenario, our eyes just go to here, but in more examples where there's like bigger price action, you need to be careful with that because I'm seeing that common mistake. So now we get the lowest point, and this is our strong liquidity point, okay? So now what you want to do is label that and set your alert if you use alerts, and you do nothing, okay, until this low is broken. Literally nothing. We want to see this get liquidated into our POI, okay? I know it seems super simple, but I'm just seeing so many mistakes with this. So it's super key you get it. So we do nothing. Now we get our liquidation. So now here's our fake break. We have our POI mitigation. We set our buy stop above the candle's high, and below the low, and we do whatever your management is, okay? As soon as that candle breaks the previous candle's low, you cancel your order and you wait for this new candle to finish printing. The very second this candle has finished printing, you have your buy stop above the high, stop loss buffer, whatever you're using below the low, and then your management, okay? Then you get tagged into the trade, and that's the trade, okay? So I know it can seem simple when you just see a nice example like this, but when there's all sorts of bigger and complex price action, a lot of you are applying the rules in the wrong way and using internal CHoCHs and using the internal of the internal fractal structure, and you're doing all of this madness when it's not valid, okay? So let me kind of show you in this example how it could have been invalid, and then we'll wrap it up. So at this point, you've, let's say, correctly identified step one, which is that you're only paying attention to the internal fractal structure because the true fractal low is within or behind the POI. So if we get a mitigation here, we want to use something that's formed in the pullback here, okay? So you recognize that. So step one means you're already mapping the internal structure from where? From the start of the pullback. You can recognize that we have the bearish internal fractal structure here. So at this point, this is the internal fractal low. This is the internal fractal high. You recognize that. So now you know you need to wait for a bullish CHoCH to occur, okay? So we would wait for this high to go. And at that point, what do? We take the lowest point, okay? So if price comes up like this, get rid of that circle. If we get an up movement, a down movement, and then a bullish internal CHoCH here, an CHoCH, okay? At this point here, where is the internal fractal low? It's here, okay? Because that would be the last candle that failed to break the previous candle's high. That would be the internal fractal low. But we don't care about that because as soon as we get that fake break that's near our POI, we take the lowest point, okay? We know that bit. So what is the ways in which people get confused is they'll know their internal fractal high is up here, right? And they should be waiting for the fake break, but price action will do something like this. It will come up, it will come down, okay? It will come up, and then it will come down like that. And then they're either trading this liquidation here, which is not valid. Why is it not valid? Because this extreme low did not break the first layer of internal fractal structure. It didn't break this high, okay? We don't care about this break. This is not valid because this is the internal of the internal fractal structure. So that's not a valid liquidation. This also is not a valid liquidation. Why? Because it's still, yes, this low did break a high. This low led to a break of the high to the left, but that's in the internal of the internal, so it is not relevant, okay? We only look at the first layer. And yeah, that's basically, I can't think of any more ways to kind of make this clear. So if you're finding this confusing, if it's melting your brain a little bit, just completely ignore the internal fractal structure. Never look at it. You do not need it. It will not be the difference between you being profitable or not over a large sample size. But if you are going to use it, you need to make sure you understand this inside out, because otherwise you'll end up taking trades, all sorts of invalid trades that are not valid. Okay? So it's a bit of a pedantic lesson where I have to really say the basics again and again and again, but it's to make sure that there are kind of no room for kind of, misinterpretation or error. So I've tried to think of every other way that this could kind of be misinterpreted. Hopefully I've kind of covered all bases now. I'll just leave it with that. If you find it confusing, leave it alone. Never look at the internal fractal structure. Just pay attention to the first, the true fractal structure. Otherwise, if you want to use it and you get it, okay, but just be careful with it, okay? Because obviously this is, in theory, lower probable than the true fractal structure. That's why we only use it in very specific scenarios.